And then having, reminding myself, like I said, that, to have that self-faith and self-confidence and self-love when sometimes things aren't going well or people are saying no and you get rejections. Getting rejection is hard, but like if you can get over it, then there's just so much more opportunity. And I actually think that applies to everything in life, right? Like if you try and fail, at least you tried. So it's not really failing because you learned. But if you just, are too scared to even try, you automatically failed,
Hmm.
right? So it's just that, um, that's been really challenging though, to sometimes have to remind myself of, those lessons.
Welcome to a new episode of Community in Arabic. I'm so happy to have Dr. Hanadie Yousef. Dr. Yousef, she's a Palestinian-American. She specializes in the molecular and biotech technology. She co-founded Juvena Therapeutics, specializing in age-related diseases and its therapeutics. Thank you so much for being with us, Hanadie.
Thank you so much for having me, Anwar.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Yeah.
So you come from a Palestinian background, but you were born in the United States. Tell us a little bit about, your background and growing up in an immigrant family.
Sure. I grew up in a very large family in Massachusetts until I was 9, and then in New York before I went off to college. I would definitely consider, really my parents' story as one that has been incredibly inspiring my entire life. So both my parents, my mom and dad, were like so many Palestinians born as refugees due to the Nakba in 1948, where my dad's family was forced to flee to Amman, and he grew up in a UN refugee camp there. Was literally born on the road as my grandma, pregnant with him, was fleeing by foot to Jordan, and my mom then was born, just a little, a couple of years after the Nakba in a refugee camp in the West Bank. They're both originally were from the outskirts of Jerusalem, so part of Jerusalem. And with my parents, and their story, what has been so inspiring, especially with my dad, was that they grew up with so much hardship, right, and poverty, with very limited resources, and economic, and of course the turmoil of war. And for my dad, what really got him out of that situation was education. He was incredibly hardworking, really persevered, and what managed actually, in going through, a UN refugee camp, to teach himself English. And when he was a teenager, the Oxford University had offered 2 scholarships to the entire Kingdom of Jordan for students that they would fully, cover to come and get bachelors at Oxford. And my dad ended up applying, and he was one of the two
Wow.
in Jordan who that year got the scholarship. And so that was his way out. He went to Oxford, majored in computer engineering, and then met my mom. They got married, spent some time teaching. I think I spent some time in Egypt as well after London. And then they came to the US when my dad got into a PhD program at Columbia, which him and my mom had a few kids at that time. And as he was pursuing his PhD, he ended up getting pursued and getting a job at what at the time was called Digital. And so he actually dropped out of his PhD with his master's, became a US citizen, and then ended up sponsoring, the rest of his family. A lot of my uncles and some of my mom's family eventually came, and so that story of my dad's was always one. And my mom, she's really smart, and was a math teacher, and they always raised us by, with that kind of theme that education and hard work is a way out of really hard circumstances. And no one can ever take, they could take your land away from you, your assets, but no one can take away your degrees and your education, and that could open so many doors. And so, that was something that really inspired me and all my siblings. And so, yeah, so that, I had that growing up.
Wow, that's amazing, and you know, the we notice really the education is probably the major theme of immigrants coming to the States, because that the hunger of we want to make it here will
Exactly.
always push us. How is it growing up in a like a big household immigrant family? how the role model of your dad and your parents in terms of pursuing the STEM field and versus other fields in the educational system here?
That's a great question. On what I would say that, like many Arab immigrant families, my family definitely wanted all their children to be doctors and engineers. So my dad was always, education was always number one. They were actually very, very strict, very conservative as well growing up. But while they wanted all of us to kind of pursue more medical type degrees, my parents were actually really shocked when I began doing research in high school. And then I started, I applied and got accepted into this kind of college level accredited research program where I ended up finding a mentor and doing research at a pharmaceutical company called Regeneron Pharmaceuticals that was really close to where I grew up in Westchester, New York. And the whole purpose would be to kind of find a mentor, do a project, and then compete in these Intel type, nationwide high school competitions. And as soon as I started doing research at Regeneron, what I, kind of quickly realized was I loved research and discoveries, right? And being innovative, and that idea of having actually my own inventions and maybe even starting a company or something based on that got me really excited. And I remember going to my parents at the time and saying, I don't want to do an MD, I want to do a PhD. And they kind of didn't get it at the time because no one in my family had pursued a PhD. And so it took them a little bit of time to sort of, come around but now, in the end, they were super proud and very supportive of that path. Nice. But that definitely, I would say that my family and their, emphasis on education and on the STEM sciences, really influenced me and my siblings, to pursue those type of degrees and careers.
So Hanadie, do you think younger generation right now are not pursuing STEM fields and other higher education as often versus other options?
No, I mean, I think there's a mix, and I think it's wonderful, right, for people to get more into the social sciences. And I wouldn't say, like, for example, one of my older sisters, Basma, she is a social impact consultant with, at this point, over 20 years of experience in the humanitarian space, working at places like the International Refugee Agency, for government, for nonprofits. Oh, wow. You know what I mean? And so that's definitely something that I think is so crucial, right? You really need to see, I think, more, as we have such an impressive Arab American community, right? Yes. And getting folks to do more government-based work, to do more nonprofit social impact. We need folks everywhere, right? We want folks both on the science side, but that's not, it's so important to make sure that we really have, folks, at every aspect of society, contributing 100%. In a way that can really reflect our values, right? Yes. And our ability to also support one another in the community.
So after you finished your PhD and then you pursued 5 years of research, you decided to jump and co-found Juvena Therapeutics. What was the epiphany moment that led you to do that? And you did this at the age of 30 is when you started your company. What was the trigger for you starting the company?
Well, I actually think kind of sharing a little bit of sort of the longer view of sort of what triggered that would be helpful. So, what we're doing at Juvena Therapeutics is we're really focused on developing regenerative protein-based therapeutics that can promote tissue regeneration by targeting key mechanisms underlying aging and tissue degeneration, and really looking and targeting protein signaling pathways that become deregulated with age, leading to chronic, life-threatening, debilitating diseases, like, for example, diabetes or frailty, you know what I mean, or cardiovascular disease, or neurological diseases. A lot of these are, in fact, due to the aging process itself. And going back to my father, who, by the way, is right behind me, that's the picture of my office, my dad. One thing that really impacted me significantly growing up was that once my dad hit his 40s, he began suffering from age-related diseases, and things started to go, with every decade, really downhill for him. So first it was, diabetes, and then cardiovascular disease and strokes. And then with every single year, like his just, frailty, like arthritis, his just mobility, his health started to decline and then accelerate. And as that was happening, I remember when I started my PhD at Berkeley, And this was back in, when I started my PhD, 2008, 2009, towards the end of my first year of grad school, I had taken a course in bioengineering with Professor Irina Conboy and her husband, Mike Conboy, and Irina ended up becoming my co-thesis advisor. And it was a class called Stem Cells and Directed Organogenesis, where it was really then that I really fell in love, right, with this concept that by actually understanding the mechanisms by which, at the protein signaling level, really understanding and looking at changes in blood circulation or locally in tissues, and really understanding the mechanisms by which stem cells in our body and other cells in our body stop functioning properly with aging and really start to lose those cues that maintain what's known as tissue homeostasis and that healthy regeneration maintenance of your tissue. By actually understanding those mechanisms, we could actually target those mechanisms to not only reverse the process, but to rejuvenate tissues, promote their regeneration, repair, and even reverse, in many ways, aging. And as I, had that sort of all of a sudden light bulb moment, of course, it was influenced so much by the fact that my own father, right, and many of my, my grandparents, many of our, our family, I'm sure many people have experienced this, were just kind of declining in health due to aging. And I felt like it was so unfair, and there were no good therapies out there that would actually treat the underlying causes versus just the symptoms. And so that's what actually inspired me to dedicate my PhD at Berkeley to really the biology of aging and actually understanding and identifying mechanisms to promote our own body stem cell function, both muscle regeneration, things like neurogenesis, new neuron formation, cognitive improvements, with the goal that maybe one day this could actually help my dad and, others and other people, and future generations. Unfortunately, I was not fast enough for my father. He passed away last year. Allah yarhamu. But, it was once I finished my PhD at Berkeley and went on to do then, a postdoc so what actually happened was when I was at Berkeley in about the third or fourth year of my grad school, one of the major discoveries I made was in looking at proteins secreted by different types of human pluripotent, such as embryonic stem cells. And what my colleagues and I realized were that these pluripotent stem cells, embryonic stem cells, not only had the capacity to generate every tissue in the body, an entire human being, but that we could actually use the proteins they secrete to regenerate degenerating aged or adult tissues. So these proteins, for example, that we isolated from human embryonic stem cells from their secretomes, were able to promote muscle regeneration and reduce scar tissue formation, fibrosis. They were able to promote new cartilage formation, when added to human chondrocyte precursors isolated from human knees of folks that had osteoarthritis. They were able to promote the survivability and the viability of human cortical neurons in the face of, for example, A beta, which is the protein aggregate that really that drives a lot of the toxicity of the neurons, and for Alzheimer's, for example. So it was these regenerative effects of these proteins that then inspired me to want to establish a company in a way to actually translate these proteins into, first discover them and identify key drivers of cellular tissue specific regeneration that we can then, through a very drug discovery and development process, and really systematic method, translate into engineered biologics for people to take to promote their own body's tissue regeneration. And so if you think of drugs like, for example, insulin, right, or human growth hormone, those are based on secreted proteins, which is really the category that Juvena is focused in. And these proteins, while they were discovered, on a more kind of serendipitous level by companies like, Genentech, for example, or Epogen with Amgen, these are proteins that, are able to really target key mechanisms of aging and age-related diseases to promote tissue regeneration and rejuvenate lives, right? So when you get, for example, the age-related metabolic disease of diabetes, you're prescribed insulin, which is it's a secreted protein-based drug that you can then just take at home, with a pre-filled syringe. And so at Juvena, it's our goal to actually establish a whole pipeline of drugs like that, right, that can be taken with injections right underneath the skin, self-administered at home, but that can promote regeneration for all sorts of age-related diseases.
Wow. This is actually revolutionary. It's the idea of now the lifespan, people are living to the mid 80s right now, especially in North America. But with this technology, I would say we maybe in 30, 50 years we can reach 100, and that will have all sort of economic impact on society, and that's amazing. Just based on your experience so far, if you can explain to our audience, just give us a general idea about the biotech industry. What are the main activities happening or the main ideas circulating right now? And would love after that to hear your idea, your thoughts about the role of AI in accelerating the R&D.
Yeah, absolutely. And all great questions, and thank you. And I do want to emphasize that at Juvena, we're not, our goal ultimately isn't just to extend lifespan. That might happen, eventually. And there's a lot of exciting companies that are targeting aging, for many of those purposes, but really to improve the years at which you are living, your life to the fullest, right? So that folks like my father and others, rather than getting these chronic, debilitating, degenerative diseases, can live their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, and hopefully even their 70s and beyond, with that full energy and ability to travel and play and be with your loved ones and be, present. And so that's what we're so passionate about. Exactly. To your question, and I didn't start out of grad school. I actually went off to do my postdoc, like you mentioned, Malek, and at Stanford for 5 years, and then I started Juvena, but we can talk about that. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the biotech field, right? Juvena is definitely part of sort of that movement where in I guess the last several years, with the advent of multiple types of technologies, such as, for example, sequencing technology, single cell sequencing, the improvements of quantitative proteomics, the increase in automation and high content imaging, combined with improvements both in data science, in biostatistics, bioinformatics, and machine learning and AI driven technologies. These are all sort of coming together to really open up so many frontiers for revolutionary new drugs, hopefully to be developed and in the near future enter the market. But things like gene editing, right? The discovery of CRISPR to actually be able to specifically edit our genomes. Like hopefully we'll start seeing therapies in that area in the future. Of course, Juvena being one of several kind of companies that have recently sprung up that are really targeting the biology of aging to treat age-related diseases, chronic diseases. And our regenerative approach, of course, is really unique. By mapping secreted proteins to unmet medical needs. There's so much. There's like so much out there. Different modalities. The RNA type therapies. The reprogramming that's happening, right? Like being able to discover that you can actually take any cell and reprogram them to become pluripotent, meaning they can then make any tissue, or do partial reprogramming where you sort of a little bit kind of rewind a cell in a way that they're stem cell like-ish, and then it causes this kind of youthful reprogramming that they've seen in animal models. There's a lot of discoveries, academic discoveries, really basic scientific discoveries that might take a bit of time, but that companies are just starting to kind of spring up around to figure out ways to take those discoveries and actually translate them into therapies that can really impact human health.
So Hanadie, over the past few years, over the past 5 years, you have raised multiple rounds of fund. Most recently, you raised your Series A. Congratulations for that, over $50 million. It's really amazing. How was your experience when you took your idea and you hit the road and you tried to explain that vision and try to find a VC that aligns with your vision and that sees the long-term applications of what you guys are working on?
It's definitely been tough. It's been a journey, and one in which I've learned tremendously and continue to learn from experience, sometimes from mistakes. So very humble and grateful for the outstanding team, for my co-founder who's really been a major partner in this, and for our founding employees and all our investors, advisors. But I had spent so it was in those early days. I was actually in my early 20s when I started thinking about Juvena, right? As a PhD student at Berkeley. But when I first, at the time, it was only my third year of grad school, I did try to talk to a few investors, think about maybe writing a grant, starting something. There was just like no one could see the vision. I wasn't, people weren't taking me seriously because I didn't have my PhD, I didn't have my patents issued yet and my publications, also just being like a younger woman and, a minority, it was tough. I went off and continued to hone my expertise with my postdoc at Stanford in the Department of Neurology, where I kept, learning more about brain aging, publishing. I got a Nature Medicine paper. I had several issued patents then, and my work at Berkeley came out. And then I feel like people started taking my ideas and this vision a little bit more seriously. And during my postdoc, I had a side project, right? And my side project that sort of was kind of mine was in building the business model around Juvena. So it was sort of years of kind of planting the seeds of kind of figuring out how I would build this systematic platform, utilizing the latest in, proteomics combined with bioinformatics, machine learning, AI type technologies to really build the systematic platform for mapping secreted proteins enriched in secretomes of stem cells to diseases, to cells and tissues in which they could promote disease modifying effects in. And so it wasn't until and then I got obsessed with my postdoc research and almost went off to be a professor. I was, working my publication revisions, being recruited by some really excellent university. So, I almost was going to just do that instead. But I found a few advisors, and it was like at Stanford, fourth year of my postdoc. It was like 2017, in which I then also found an attorney at Fenwick who really liked my idea. So the first thing I did was not actually get an investor to give me money. It was to get my sister and brother-in-law to, angel invest a little. I had one advisor angel invest a little bit. And then I found a corporate attorney from a top, corporate firm who said, I like you. I like your idea. I think you can start this. I will just, I will help you help you kind of get set up your shop. And then you could just pay me back once you get your, seed financing round. So that deferment, so getting that, really helped legitimize things.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I met my co-founder at Stanford and convinced him to come on board and join, and that was like in the fall of 2017, and we had our business model, we were incorporated, we had a little bit of angel money, as mentioned, from, advisor, a little bit of family, angel investor money. That's when we went out and started pitching to institutional investors in Silicon Valley. And it continues to be, right? Every year I've raised is always a struggle, in the sense that most folks aren't going to, understand your vision. You're actually going to, most of your answers are going to be no. You're going to spend so much time in diligence where you're like, great, I've spent months, I've, answered all your questions, I've spent hours and hours and hours, I've visited you in person, and you think you're going to get a yes, and then it's a no. Right? Yes. There's so much grit, perseverance. And I would say really just believing in yourself, right? Understanding that deep down, no matter how many people kind of aren't aligning, you're using all the feedback from every single pitch, from every single no, to improve and strengthen your business model, to improve your pitch, your story. Mm-hmm. My ability to kind of sway investors. And so, and we were fortunate to now have an outstanding, right, syndicate of, angel and some, a mixture of institutional investors as well as really prominent angel investors, who have supported us and continue to. And so it's been a journey with that, the long story short, I guess.
This is amazing. Hanadie, I'm really curious about the thought process in the early stage of this idea. We've noticed a lot of examples of researchers or professors. They have an idea, they're working at a university, and then the two options, whether taking grants from the university, working on that idea within the university environment, but at the end, the idea is owned by the university. You might have some royalties, you might negotiate that. The other option is going by yourself and trying to figure out a way for funding. I'm sure you've been through that, decision. How did you approach it? And, walk us through the thought process.
That's a great question. There is, it's kind of like this balance you have to play where, when you're doing research in academia, right, everything you discover, of course, you're going to be co-inventor, but it's all owned by the university. And
Exactly.
so some universities are a little bit more friendly than others in, for example, kind of, what arrangements or how much it costs to license or what equity they might want as part of the kind of deal that you put together. I had some IP out of Berkeley that we considered at Juvena, licensing based on some of the discoveries I'd made at that time on the regenerative effects of human embryonic stem cell secretomes. But we ended up, after actually doing a little bit of research, well, I'm so proud of my issued patents and everything. We actually realized that in the business model we developed at Juvena, where we're identifying, key individual proteins and combinations of proteins and really mapping proteins, not whole secretomes, but proteins, specific proteins to different indications, that there was just so much more work we needed to do at Juvena and IP around those, the platform plus the assets we were developing, that we needed to do at Juvena to really protect what we're commercializing.
Okay.
Protect, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So we were, one thing I encourage, and I do mentor a lot of early founders and, postdocs and grad students that are considering spinning out through things like StartX, Nucleate Bio, On Deck Longevity, and others. You know what I mean? I'm really passionate about mentoring folks. And, what I kind of tell them is, if you have some great ideas, and if you are able to, before you have, like, if it's early enough where there's still a bit more work to do, rather than do it in academia and then have to deal with licensing,
Yes.
see if you can get a little bit of angel money. It doesn't even have to be seed yet. It could be pre-seed, and you literally rent lab space, which is exactly what Juvena did. We literally set up shop for 4 years at a nonprofit organization called StartX, which is a community of founders that are alumni or affiliated with Stanford, that basically, work together to support one another. And they have a building down the road from Stanford that you can actually rent really cheap office and even lab space to get started. So that's what we chose to do, which was basically, really build the IP around what we're doing at Juvena and do it for us. It was during seed stage, but other founders I've recommended, even if it means pre-seed, getting a small sum of money from a few angels or even grants like SBIR grants, and then just renting some space and generating the data and then filing your own IP with your IP attorney. That's going to be a much easier way and to go than licensing from university, but it's also doable, and more universities are kind of becoming a little bit more understanding and flexible when it comes to their IP, because universities, they should be incentivized to want, spin outs from academia to not hold back founders.
100%.
So things are improving, but yeah, so that's the deal with Juvena. We ended up just generating our own IP.
And also, to my knowledge, Stanford really, their entrepreneurship environment there is really supportive for spin-offs and entrepreneurs. I'm really curious about the pros and cons and lesson learned from being researcher versus entrepreneur. If you can, I guess walk us through the pros and cons and the contrast between these two worlds.
Absolutely. And what Malek, and you guys mentioned, it's very different job descriptions,
Yes.
right? So I think what I love about being a scientist, right, is the just ability to kind of have these hypotheses, ideas, and go after them and design experiments, which I actually love doing, and executing them and getting data and analyzing data and understanding, new things based on those experiments. So being, in the lab, if you're a wet lab researcher or even a computational biologist, and at your computer, but really just focused on the research, on the science, is so much fun. But if you are also someone that has a side of you that's, a little bit more social or extroverted, or on the sort of, management, like there's certain aspects that being just in the lab, you don't get some satisfaction out of, that I think being an entrepreneur and building an organization, any type of organization, but also like, a business, a corporation, really, is an added skill set, right? For me, my science, along with my, co-founder and CSO, who's a proteomics and machine learning expert, Jeremy, he and I, like, together have really driven the science and built our platform. And I'm very heavy on the science, was based on a lot of my discoveries, and ideas. And so having that is actually really useful. And I think many of my investors that say that they love having, a chief executive officer who also has the technical background and actually understands the work, isn't just sort of like a salesperson. But then on the other side of the coin, being an entrepreneur, you're also dealing with things that some scientists don't like to deal with, but, a lot of G&A, right? A lot of human resources, a lot of, leadership in terms of like just being able to kind of lead, delegate, manage, sell your vision. And I'm continuously learning, you know what I mean? It's like, I wouldn't say I'm perfect at anything, but, just kind of willing to try and just fortunate that I have a team that's sort of, willing and excited about sharing that mission, that vision, and executing on that vision, because I can be the visionary, but then if I'm doing all that and all the CEO stuff, I can't be in the lab doing I tried actually doing the first year of Juvena. I was actually doing experiments and everything, but that did not last very long. So that's how they're different. You know what I mean? One is more a business type role versus just being like a scientist, which is also really exciting.
Right. Out of curiosity, did you ever pursue any like mentorship or any further education on the business side just to supplement your knowledge there so you can run? Because at the end of the day, it's a business operation that's got to run.
Absolutely. And, it's scary, right? For someone, I remember when we first closed our seed round, turning to my colleagues and co-founder, I was like, wait a minute, did these investors really just wire $4 million into a business bank account I just opened and walk away? Right? I thought there was going to be some like 101,
This is amazing.
here's a book, like here's how you deal with attorneys, here's like how you set, nothing, right? And I was floored, nervous, freaked out for a moment. And then I was like, okay. And then that's actually why we were so fortunate to like, sometimes it's just about finding what you don't, understanding and accepting that you don't know, like there's you don't know most of what you should know, and you have to learn it and figure it out. And then having organizations, right? It's all about the network effect. So I was able to get advisors, right, who were experienced, some of them serial entrepreneurs, some of them, other biotech type CEOs or CSOs, mentors, so those folks were, and many of my investors who became sort of mentors, who were really instrumental in helping guide who I could really ask any question to. And then having that community, like getting into StartX, and then having other founders and companies. And I'm also part of the sort of aging biology founder community here in Silicon Valley. So basically I found several more experienced, CEOs to kind of be people that I could lean on, I could message, I could ask questions, as well as, like I said, the advisors, and then really supportive investors. And I read a lot of books and a lot of audiobooks, management books, audiobooks. Like I'm like a sponge, you know what I mean? Constantly trying to learn and figure things out. And luckily now Juvena is able to also hire, right, industry veterans, good managers. Like it's not about doing it all yourself. It's actually about really building that team and, really sharing in that, I know I keep saying it, but that mission, right, together, knowing that we're building something great, that we, and that there's steps to get there and it's a path, and just having really experienced folks with you on that journey, and also in leadership positions.
Right. I mean, that community that you're counting on as mentors, that's got to be like incredibly, helpful and important, because I feel like the scariest part isn't what you don't know, because you can learn that. It's what you don't know that you don't know, right? Like what's in your blind spot, and you're like completely, it's like out of your realm of possibilities, and then suddenly it's in your face. So like that's got to be very, very important. So, looking down the road, what's your vision? What's the future look like for you and for, Juvena Therapeutics over the next 5 years on the long run?
We're so excited. We are just so excited to be right here. You know what I mean? It's probably like, things will always get, there's going to be challenges, you know what I mean? I, don't want to jinx myself, but definitely it's like, for us, it's so exciting because we just, closed our Series A financing last year, which took us a while, right? It was not an overnight thing. It wasn't even like just a 1-year thing, right? Like I felt like I'd started Juvena, gotten our seed. And from that moment on, I was like, what do we need to do to get to that Series A, which I felt in so many ways was going to be sort of like a milestone that really legitimized this company. And then, it showed that we're here for the long run. And we were a seed stage company for 4.5 years. We raised that 4.3 million seed. We did 8.2 million in safe notes. We raised over $4 million in grants from the National Institute of Health and the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine before finally closing a substantial Series A with some outstanding investors, including one that's Middle East based, Mubadala Ventures, by the way. So, got some support from the neighborhood.
Yes.
Were they the lead investor? Because
what I would say is we're looking in the next 5 years to advance at least one, if not some of our drugs into the clinic, right? So to go from being a discovery preclinical company to then now really being in that clinical stage where, so next year we hope to get our first, what's called an investigational new drug for a neuromuscular disease called myotonic dystrophy type 1. And then once we get the IND next year, we will then hopefully, knock on wood, be going into the clinic, right? Into a combined phase 1/2 clinical study. We have several other early stage discovery hits, meaning proteins that we've discovered at Juvena and identified can drive certain types of cellular or tissue regeneration across different therapeutic areas, right? From, pulmonary fibrotic type diseases to, cardiometabolic, things for like liver disease, and looking at several other, therapeutic areas to really building up that platform, building up our machine learning capabilities, our computationally driven discovery, and hopefully getting 2 to 3 new drugs to that point of, being in that preclinical stage in the next few years, and then into the clinic.
That's an exciting goal. Out of curiosity, was Mubadala the lead investor on your Series A?
They co-led. Yeah, they co-led it.
Okay. Hanadie, a two-part question. I've been noticing, being in the healthcare industry myself, the amount of money and investment in new startups since the early 2010s has been increasing every year. And now recently, the past 5 to 10 years, the interest and excitement from the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're really interested in health IT and biotech and life sciences. Can you tell us more about your observation of the amount of funding and the interest from our region in the Middle East in life sciences and biotech?
I'd say it's increasing, like you're saying. You know what I mean? When I first set up shop with Juvena, I never even thought about, at the time, I remember in 2017, 2018, actually Mubadala had just set up in 2018 their venture office in San Francisco, and then started investing in biotech. So, it has just been in the last few years that there's growing interest. But with Mubadala, they actually have a really impressive now growing portfolio of biotech companies, really focused on companies that have really unique computationally driven platforms for drug discovery and development. So I'm really happy to be part of that family. And then, for example, there's another fund that Juvena is not yet involved with or anything, but we definitely, would like to be in the future, called Evolution Foundation.
Okay.
That was, that Saudi Arabia basically, is funding, which is also a nonprofit with kind of a venture arm that's going to be investing starting this year $1 billion a year in age-related disease research and an understanding of the biology of aging and longevity. And I think Mubadala is starting a bit of a focus in this area as well. And so the reason this is so important and applicable to the Middle East in our region is we have some of the, unfortunately in the Arab Gulf and just, Arab Levant, the Arab world, some of the largest, chronic debilitating diseases, incidences of that, like, obesity related diseases, diabetes, metabolic, frailty, stroke, cardiovascular. It's 100%. Really sad. It's all over the world. Don't get me wrong. This is like a global thing, but we definitely have, I think there's now been a increasing realization in the Middle East that it's so important to develop therapies in ways to promote healthy aging and to really target some of these age-related chronic diseases, through unique mechanisms, right? So I am seeing from the Arab Gulf in particular, but hopefully, it'll grow an increase in wanting companies such as Juvena's, in this healthcare sector, just the sector of also, even digital health, of, other ways in which we can really, educate our, the Arab world on healthier living and also remedies and therapeutics to target these diseases. So there's an increase for sure.
And Hanadie, I'm really curious to explore. Did your background as an immigrant, did this background has anything to do with being an entrepreneur and your entrepreneur drive? I'm really curious because maybe it has nothing to do, but I've noticed a lot of including ourselves and other immigrants, that we want to do something of our own. This entrepreneurship spark in us as immigrants. So I'm really curious if it's the same for you.
Absolutely.
Yes?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think being an immigrant or being first generation, I remember just a couple weeks ago, literally 2 weeks ago, I was on a panel during JP Morgan for this biotech showcase. It was like an
Oh,
AI panel where each one of us on the panel, we're talking about how, artificial intelligence applied to biotech, diagnostics, drug discovery. And we, each of us, every single person on the panel was either an immigrant or a first generation,
wow.
right? And I think that's a very common theme. And I
Yes.
think there is this kind of sense of really appreciating that grit, that perseverance, that kind of the opportunity that America presents in terms of, actually being able to go up the ladder through education, hard work, and making it work that way that you see in a lot of first generation folks and immigrants. And I shared my family story that's been so inspiring, and it wasn't even just my dad. Like, I remember, like, everyone in my family has been a bit, so many folks have been entrepreneurial. My mom's grandparents decided to stay in the West Bank, and they had everything stripped from them. And they, my grandfather got a sewing machine and started making and selling clothes, and then he became a teacher. And then him and my grandma, right, who didn't even have a read it, wasn't even able to read, actually didn't even have like a her finish her education.
Yes.
They actually partnered and then set up a money trading business, right, like through the
Amazing.
West Bank in Jordan, and then were able to move out of the refugee camp and buy their own house. So I've always been able to look at sort of my family and see, if they could make it happen in some of the toughest, like conditions, and actually having lost everything and then work your way back, then hopefully I can make it work growing up in in a beautiful house and neighborhood and with amazing resources here in the States.
Amazing.
And so that's definitely driven me, and I definitely think that is a common theme with immigrants or first generation folks in the Arab community, but also in many cultures.
What's your advice to young Arab immigrants, young and even first generation, and young Arab women want to pursue entrepreneurship or the field of STEM? What are your advice to them?
Thanks. I mean, I think my thanks for asking. My advice would be to, pursue your dreams and don't let anything get in the way, right? Like, it's going to be tougher as a woman, unfortunately, regardless of, just being a woman, period. And then you add, being a Arab woman or Muslim, if you are just being a woman of color, how
Exactly.
you identify, it's even tougher, right? That it takes sometimes, folks won't take you as seriously, or, you know what I mean? Like, you feel really uncomfortable sometimes when you walk in a room to give a pitch and, no one looks like you, but don't let that stop you, right? Because, people are more and more appreciating that diversity actually brings profitability, right? And, you being your uniqueness and being different, you actually have so much to add because of that. And no matter what folks say, there will be champions. There's going to be folks that, try to put you down or prevent, but you'll also have champions. And, also coming from sort of the Arab culture, sometimes our families can be a little conservative, but, hopefully they can see the benefit, right, of really, having, Arab women be educated, get out of the housework, do things like, I think it's something that really helps and will bolster our community. And I just, want to say, go get it, I guess, you know what I mean? And folks can definitely reach out to me. I'm always happy to be a mentor, or if I
Amazing.
have the chance to answer questions and try to open doors for other, women and other people in the community.
Great, great. Well, we can jump to the next stage before we touch quickly on AI and the role of AI and the growth in your industry. I mean, like recently, like there's a lot of talk about ChatGPT and the different applications of it, and that's probably like just scratching the surface in terms of the applications of AI in industry. So, what's your observation and how it's applicable in your industry and how fast it's growing?
Yeah, I think what's really exciting, I guess, about applying artificial intelligence and machine learning type technologies is it is accelerating our ability to get results and to speed up the actual process of discovery and development. Right at Juvena, we don't think of just AI driving anything. It's really just utilizing artificial intelligence technologies combined with other types of computational techniques, bioinformatics, statistical methods, to integrate into every step of our in silico prediction, of a protein's ability to cause a disease modifying effect in a cell. Then, developing different types of, for example, deep learning models that can help us quantitate and improve the ability to actually get data when we test then those proteins in our high throughput screening human in vitro disease model assays, to then also integrating, deep learning models and tools for the way that we quantitate things like functional behavior of animals when we inject the proteins in animal models to test whether they're actually having an effect, in the physiological setting to target an age-related or rare chronic type of disease. So that's what I think is really, it's becoming something that I think ultimately isn't just going to be companies that use AI and companies that don't, with the improvement in these, types of pattern recognition, basically algorithms, right? It's we're already seeing improvements across so many sectors in every sector of society, from, including biotechnology, right? And so I think eventually the way I see AI improving what we do is every single researcher is going to want to use these type of models and techniques to improve, I think, the discovery, the screening, and the development process. And AI is actually becoming some technologies, and some companies are even becoming so good with their with artificial intelligence that they're able to design molecules from scratch without needing sort of a human chemist or human sort of molecular expert to design that. So there's so much that's happening with AI for diagnostics as well. Like using some of these models are actually helping us identify cancers earlier, or screen and assess images in a way that even human experts, are not doing. So I think just augmenting human professions, is sort of the future of AI, and really, being able to use it to just improve and speed up the drug discovery process is the way that Juvena is leveraging, deep learning and machine learning techniques.
Amazing.
Got it. Well, Hanadie, you're clearly very passionate about your field, about what you're doing. So I've just quick fire round for you. What inspires you?
What inspires me? So I am inspired, and I know I'm like a broken record with this, but I'm definitely inspired so much, by my, family and my father's personal story. I am also inspired by this just passion and ambition, right? To want to see some of these ideas and discoveries that I made, my colleagues have made, at the bench, actually make it, from bench to the clinic to actually help people. I'm really inspired by knowing that what we're aiming to solve is something that if we don't solve could really affect humanity in a very negative way, right? As you kind of, said, Anwar, earlier, right? We actually, it's like there's a major healthcare crisis that we're facing with the global aging population. People are living longer than ever, but the actual amount of time that they're living with chronic debilitating diseases with no cures is longer than ever. It's these windows are getting larger, and so we want to shorten that time and really improve health span. And so that desire, and the desire and inspiration to knowing that what I do will hopefully help future generations, live life to the fullest, and then lastly, knowing that also my success, will hopefully open a lot of doors for other, ADAB women, for the ADAB community, to really showcase and help us. And, I would like to, in my spare time, do things like philanthropy, support nonprofits, support, folks on the ground. My success and inshallah in the future, my wealth will also hopefully lead to being able to channel some of that into improvements, for our community. So that really inspires and drives me as well.
What was the best moment that stands out in your recent journey, through your education and through starting the company and today?
I would say there were, I don't know if there was just one. I feel like there were a few kind of pivotal moments, right? I mentioned sort of the light bulb moments of, starting my PhD and realizing that the area I wanted to focus on, the biology of aging, could lead to starting a company, which had been a dream since I started my research as a teenager at Regeneron. Another pivotal moment, of course, was like getting my PhD.
Right.
That was a huge, just, feeling of accomplishment in terms of, and then when I was at Stanford, when my submitted, and then actually when my Nature Medicine paper, I had a first author Nature Medicine paper come out of some of my research on the neurobiology of brain aging. That was pivotal. Closing the seed round for Juvena, right? Incorporating Juvena, right? Because I was definitely freaking out a bit and not sure if I wanted to leave my postdoc, and I was thinking about being a professor. And so just incorporating and getting that done was like a moment. Closing the seed round, right, was, a huge excitement. You know what I mean? Closing the Series A, right? Like succeeding in the fundraise last year, right? Because that was going to make or break Juvena, right? We were, there's only so long we would have been able to go on a while longer and continue probably with grants. But now with this influx of capital, the team has tripled already in size. We're continuing to hire, outstanding management team as well as scientists and engineers. We now have the resources to really execute even more on some of these ideas and progress we made in the early days. So
great. And on the flip side, what was the worst or most challenging moment in that journey, if any stands out?
The fundraise, right? Fundraising is hard. So I think the most challenging was in what my job description entails, right? When you're CEO, like, I am the one that really has, leads and is responsible for making sure that, everyone, gets their paycheck at the end of every month and whatnot, right? And that the doors stay open. And so I think that has been, continuously really challenging, but it's something that I'd like to say I'm getting better at. You know what I mean? Like continuously improving, but I just think fundraising has been consistently the hardest thing I've ever done. And then having, reminding myself, like I said, that, to have that self-faith and self-confidence and self-love when sometimes things aren't going well or people are saying no and you get rejections. Getting rejection is hard, but like if you can get over it, then there's just so much more opportunity. And I actually think that applies to everything in life, right? Like if you try and fail, at least you tried. So it's not really failing because you learned. But if you just, are too scared to even try, you automatically failed, right? So it's just that, that's been really challenging, though, to sometimes have to remind myself of, those lessons.
Wow. That's right. Well, Hanadie, we really enjoyed the conversation with you. This was absolutely inspiring, and we look forward to staying in touch and to hearing about more future successes for yourself and for Juvena.
Thank you so much, Malek.